I'm here today to talk about ergogenics in sport. My name is Matt Lovell. I'm a practitioner, nutritional practitioner. I've been working in the area for 25 years, including lots of work in elite sports, lots of other individuals as well. And I'm here today to share some of my ideas in the area. So, this little introduction is just setting the scene, um, def- defining ergogenics, looking at what that means and how that might help an athlete. And then we're going to sort of start to expand on the whole concept of resilience and adaptation to stress, because ultimately, really all we're talking about is stress plus recovery equals resilience, or training plus recovery equals fitness, and so on. As an adaptive organism, this is really what it's all about. So, like I said, I've been working in this area for a long time. I've been lucky enough to work with some really high level teams and athletes, at the highest level, really. Well, World Cup winning teams, Olympic medal winning athletes and individuals. But I suppose the work really is everyone's running their own marathon. I'm just as happy helping someone, a recreational triathlete, get a personal best as I am helping the elites. I get just as much of that ikigai feeling, and I think I'm here really just to help people. That's ultimately my primary raison d'etre, if you like. And little example I like to give here, which starts to paint the picture around the power of nutrition, the power of functional medicine, of functional health programming, of coaching behavior change, coaching mental wellness, is making humans more awesome, more optimum, is really what it's all about. A rugby player's grandma sought some advice a few years ago. She had an inflammatory condition, arthritic thumbs, arthritic body really, but her thumbs were particularly bad, and she couldn't carry out activities of everyday living such as opening jars, doors. But what particularly bothered her was not being able to lift her grandchildren up without a great deal of pain and discomfort. So we'll talk a lot about inflammation today. It's the immune system's mechanism of travel, and it needs to be moderated. So things which are powerful moderators of the inflammatory system and the immune system: omega-3, high polyphenol rich foods, vitamin D, optimum gut health, sleep relaxation protocols. So as a scattering of a little bit of that magic for her resulted in, within 2 weeks, she had significantly less pain. Obviously, there's no miracle cures in this game, but there are very powerful natural ways to feel a lot better and perform at your maximum capacity. So it's quite nice to look at the etiology around some of these concepts. So picking apart what does resilience really mean, and then looking at it in the context of functional medicine matrix, and looking at the crossover: oxidative stress, inflammation, illness, disease. Ultimately, many of my current clients are interested in longevity-based stuff, so feeling as good as you can until we all fall off the perch. Health span is the way we sometimes refer to that, rather than lifespan. So maximum health span. So a few little things you can dig through there in terms of thinking about what it is to be a resilient human, a resilient athlete, and as we unpack things, how we can use the best food, the best supplements in order to achieve that ultimate goal. Creating resilient athletes and individuals is really the key to things. Emotional, physiological, physical resilience and toughness, whilst remembering to be compassionate and kind. Yeah, it's not just pure tough individuals we're talking about. So, one way we influence all this is via a systems biology approach, and I'll unpack that in part 2. But let's talk about now what really we're going to focus on today, which is what is an ergogenic aid. Well, it's anything, any substance or phenomenon that enhances performance. So, Limitless is an extreme example of a type of smart drug which has amazing effects. Nootropics are a big area in the ergogenic space, and they can also have amazing effects. But what are we talking about? Ultimately, we're talking about enhancing performance, and one of the reasons athletes want to enhance performance is because they want to win races. But unfortunately, that can lead us to the dark side of sport, which is the use of performance enhancing drugs. And I think it's part of this talk today, although we won't go into it in massive amounts of detail, is the history of humans seeking ergogenic aids, and whether that be ancient warriors eating, deer heart and liver and even testicles of sheep to potentially get a little bit of extra testosterone, right up to the modern day. I mean, when I say modern, I'm talking from 1860s through the 1950s, invention of steroids, drugs, people being able to synthesize human growth hormone, peptides, secretagogues, natural and unnatural ones. But primarily and exclusively today we're talking about stuff which isn't going to test you positive. An example I give you was one of my athletes, Lisa Dobrisky. I think she came in, I'm going to try and remember, 10th, and now with hindsight drug testing she's now 4th. I wouldn't be surprised if she medals at some point. And then if you look at the 100 meter races, the only one who hasn't tested positive is Usain Bolt, funnily enough. Everyone else has tested positive, and he's retired now, so that is what you might call a hot spot for drug tests. And people are still taking tons of performance enhancing drugs which will get them banned. And you can see here, quite pleased England's not in this list, although people do make mistakes, and potentially there are some dopers as well in English sport, but it's just not as many. It's far fewer. We're much better at regulating that, much more careful with offering athletes potentially the right kind of alternatives, which is what I do as a sports nutritionist. So let's look at ergogenic aids again: physical, mechanical, nutritional, psychological, or pharmacological substance that either directly improves physiological variables associated with exercise performance or removes subjective or objective restraints which may limit physiological capacity. So that's interesting, isn't it? So you can either take things which enhance or, I suppose, remove constraints, leveling the playing field. And here's some examples. So legal ones, the right kind of training plan can go a long way. Teams that get that wrong won't excel. Obviously, individual athletes won't excel. So a lot is down to the coaching. Masses amount down to the coaching. And you got things varying from hydration drinks right through to things like creatine. Big aspect of this is around mental strengthening coaching now these days. So it might not be hypnosis. It might just be teaching someone to be really, really mentally strong. And part of that is a softer area around being at one with the ball, kind of idea. I really like that idea. If you can enhance the power of the mind, and that can transfer into kicking more goals accurately, then I'm all over that. And then you got your illicit or banned stuff, everything, steroids, growth hormone, blood doping, all things like that. And then things which might start off okay, marijuana, natural source of ephedrine, was fine for a while. Then, few people have adverse effects, few deaths associated with ephedrine, then it gets banned. So you always have to keep your eye on what's on the ban list, what's off the ban list. And some things go on the ban list and then they come off. Like caffeine. Yeah. Right, so here we have, again, digging a little bit deeper. What we're going to do today is talk about fixing deficiencies, removing stressors, removing restraints, putting things in on top of other things which can really, really help. I'll go through my system-based approach, try and be as sports-specific as possible, but really you're looking at the human and you're putting the human into the context of the sport rather than having a sport-specific diet. It's always the individual. Then you look at the demands of their sport and go from there. And there can be things that sports need more of and other sports need less of course it can, but you're dealing with the individual. So we always need to look at athlete profiling. If you don't do this, you don't know what's working. You have to display efficacy, because otherwise why are you being paid? Why are they paying a lot of money for supplements? So we need to find out what needs improving, how do we improve it, how do we measure it, and then how do we refine what we're using, individual to individual, case by case scenario. Recovery status, people are getting pretty good at this now, even to the point at which in some teams you start mentioning recovery, everyone's eyes are going to roll because it's hammered home so much. It may even be, an additional source of stress if you're overemphasizing something so much. You have to be careful about that kind of thing. But in terms of what can we measure? Well, we can look in the bloods. We can use questionnaires. You can look at output. Devices are very good at looking at heart rate variability. You can do profile of mood state questionnaires. All of these are clinically validated, and you need a system in place in order to measure stuff and improve it. Particularly if someone's struggling. So if you've got someone who is borderline or dipping in and out of overtraining syndrome, then these become critical factors. So I suppose in the elite environment, whenever a camp's starting or build up to Olympic Games is starting, You've got some athletes to look after. There's a certain amount of education is going to be vital because people are going to need to be informed, make an informed choice. You've got to show the pros and the cons of each intervention, and as a result of that, it's usually really a good idea if you're choosing something that has first and foremost a powerful health effect, and then the secondary effect might be performance enhancing. And that's almost always the case with ergogenics. I suppose the one exception to that might be use of stimulants before a game, because generally we use a bit more stimulant than you might want to take on a daily basis, but that's for peak events. That wouldn't be a daily occurrence. And we can also put stuff in place which replenishes and repairs the depletion that occurs via high dose stimulant use. So Pareto principle is good. What's the 20% thing that is going to give you the 8% of the benefit? Best bang for buck. Another way to talk about that. And guiding people to healthy choices and away from places where they might inadvertently grab something which sounds really great but might cause a positive test. And it is a bit of a minefield. And even though athletes are their own population group, of course they are. But when you look at a rugby team, well, they and most other athletes as well, they live in the same towns as us. They shop at the same supermarkets. They watch the same adverts. They won't have always been an athlete. They may have been brought up with a different set of ideas around food, and as a result, they will be exposed to plenty of myths and concepts around what might be healthy, what's not healthy. So it's really important to show them exactly why things are going to work and why eating like other people isn't going to help them. You can't eat like a normal person and expect to perform at an elite level. So sometimes it's good to boil this back down to simple stuff. So simple stuff might be what can go wrong, what part of the integration of food into the body can go wrong. So you can choose the wrong foods, you can fail to assimilate them or digest them properly, you can have problems getting the food out through detoxification, and if you take the wrong foods in, you can have issues where you do need to detoxify. The inflammation system is always in need of a bit of management, and you've got your endocrine system, of course, which we'll go into in more detail. And then the whole our central nervous system is housed in a physical vessel. That's the bones, ligaments, tendons, everything else. So you've got to keep that structure functioning. Obviously, in an athlete, that is a key thing. So if we delve into those concepts a bit more detail, we've got energy balance to consider, we've got absorption, we've got the gut, the microbiome, immune system and inflammation, we've got sweating, we've got bowel movements, liver detoxification, using fat for fuel, metabolic flexibility. We need to be paying attention to gut health, antioxidant intake from foods, omega-3 to 6 status, anti-inflammatory nutrition, vitamin D status. We need to be aware of hormones, body and brain, and then we need to be looking at muscle, ligament, tendon strength and all of that stuff. Not forgetting that this is what it's all about. You stress yourself, you recover, you come back fitter, faster, stronger, you stress yourself again, and really that's what it's all about. Sometimes you've got to keep the whole system simple. But within that adaptation cycle, we have to consider all the other things that are going on. And often this will result in, 2 weeks of reading, and then you're saying to an athlete, stop doing that and take a little bit of this. It's the answers on the back of a postcard kind of coaching point. Stop doing that, take a bit more of that. You got a bit too much of this. Let's get that sorted, and off you go. And that's why we've got these things we can measure. The soft skills and the relationships and the art of relaxation cannot be underestimated. One of my good friends, Nathan Douglas, recovered from overreaching syndrome simply by including more of the soft human interaction, time with family and things like that he'd neglected at the expense of purely being focused on nutrition, training, massage, purely athlete focus, and no time to rest and recover. When we look at all that in relationship to the adaptation response, I'm going to come on to that in a bit and start to unpack allostasis, allostatic load, the stress cup, hormesis, which is like the safe dose of something which might not be safe if you take too much of it, so it's just enough, not too much, that kind of approach. And we look at all that and we think, well, what does that mean in context of an athlete? Well, what you might find is the physiotherapists are telling you, this guy's a slow healer. And you'd be like, what do you mean? And then you run an adrenal panel and you find out things aren't quite as good as they should be. So that's someone who would really, really benefit from some of these interventions, and interventions which enhance recovery from, adrenal insufficiency, borderline overtraining syndrome, or full-blown overtraining syndrome, are just intensifications of a normal recovery protocol. But you got to have a normal recovery protocol in place, and then because that's your day to day, and then you just want to intensify it at points when it's required in a bigger dose in relation to what you've been doing otherwise. So when we look at I suppose the hormetic dose of something is an environmental challenge. It could actually be training. You could train yourself to death if you wanted to. It's going to be quite hard to do. But you have a beneficial load, you have a load which requires more recovery from, and then you have a load which is you cannot maintain adaptive processes without paying attention to rest and recovery at some point in that cycle. So here's an example of a good night's sleep. You have a good day of training, and then you go on and you recover and you repair. But in a separate situation, you have a bad night of sleep, so an inadequate dose of sleep, and then you have too much work stress, so actually you need to reduce the training load in that situation according to the fact that you've underslept and so on. Usually one night's poor sleep, you can train normally the next day, but if you go into the second night's poor sleep, then you've got problems. When you're considering something like sleep, what you've got with sleep is, if you don't sleep properly, it's a threat. Inadequate sleep is it manifests itself as an internal physiological stressor or threat. And we have, when we're managing stress, we have external and internal sources of stress. So that's always worth thinking about. We're going to delve into adaptogens around this area a bit later on, but suffice to say that they are a good idea. I lectured with Panasan a few years ago. Crazy, wonderful guy, published over 200 peer-reviewed studies on adaptogens, and they're becoming more popular. I popularized these in elite sports. I was one of the first ones to do it, as far as I know, if not the first one, in the UK. And they rock. I started taking them when I was 8. My dad's an acupuncturist, so that's one of the reasons I learnt about these things from an early age. So let's wrap up that intro section with a little look at plant adaptogens before we move on to systems biology approach after that.